I'm Nate Spack, and today I will be presenting on Chapter 6, Segment 1 of the Psychology textbook. So, sensation begins with a stimulus, and sensation is simply the process by which the nervous system detects the physical events around or inside us, and perception is the experience we have as we process information from sensory cells. The final interpretation of sensory information is called a percept. And a stimulus is any physical event affecting a sensory receptor cell. And sensory receptor cells are specialized sensory cells that detect stimuli. And each receptor cell is specialized to detect a certain stimulus. Now, audition and olfaction are our sense of hearing and smelling respectively. Sensory modalities is just another term for our senses. And an adequate stimulus is the type of stimulus for which a given sensory receptor organ is particularly adapted. So, for example, the adequate stimulus for the eye is light. Now finally, labeled lines are specific nerves dedicated to relaying specific information to the brain. So nerves in the eye are dedicated to relaying information about light to the brain. Psychophysics systematically analyzes perception. So psychophysics is the study of the impacts of physical events on our senses. And the absolute threshold is the lowest intensity stimulus which a person can detect half the time. Stimuli sensed more than half the time are said to be above threshold, and stimuli sensed less than half the time are said to be below threshold. Now, the just noticeable difference is the smallest change in stimulus that can be detected, and Weber's fraction is the just noticeable difference expressed as a proportion of the original stimulus. Detection involves finding a signal in a background of noise. So, sometimes sensory systems fire without a stimulus, and this is just known as noise. And signal detection theory is concerned with how well stimuli are detected in a background of noise. So the brain screens sensory input to determine what's important and what isn't. So we have a chart here, and there's two ways a signal is correctly detected. There's a hit where a person detects a real signal, and a correct rejection where you correctly ignore background noise. However, there's two ways a signal is incorrectly detected. The first one here, the false alarm, is when you think there was a signal when there actually wasn't one, and there's also a miss where you just don't detect the signal at all. A key question in sensory systems is whether or not a stimulus is a signal or just a noise. And we can set criterion to successfully detect stimuli of different magnitudes. So we have this chart here, and this line in the middle represents the criterion for detecting a stimulus. And it says dotted line here, but it's represented by this middle line in this chart. And the left curve represents the background noise, and the right curve detects the signal that one is trying to sense. So the further these two curves are apart, the easier it is to detect a stimulus among the noise. So the correct reject area right here would be bigger, and the hit area would be bigger, while the false alarm and miss areas on this chart would be smaller. And this is very important because in almost any decision we make, we decide whether a false alarm or a miss is more tolerable, and this chart comes into play as a result. Now, our nerves provide information about a specific type of stimulation. So the brain treats every nerve as a labeled line, and different types of touch receptors are involved in structure and function. Our nerves provide information about a specific type of stimulation. So the brain treats every nerve as a labeled line, and different types of touch receptors are different in structure and function. So the first type of touch receptor we have is Meissner's corpuscle, and these are just tiny round cells that respond to touch. And the Pacinian corpuscle consists of onion-like layers of membrane sensitive to vibration and pressure. Next one, Merkel's disc, is sensitive to light touch that bends the ridges of your fingertips, so very light touch. And then we have free nerve endings, in which some are sensitive to pain while others are sensitive to temperature. And finally, we have nerves wrapped around hair follicles that detect any bend in hair. I'm Nate Speck, and that's my presentation.